Summit League, conference meetings, media day. Prior to that, we're just going to have a little off-the-cuff conversation. I'm not even going to ask you about your teams or how things are going. We're just going to go into some topics that might be relevant to you individually as head coaches, but also kind of from the national landscape side of things. First of all, I'll introduce, we've got from Oral Roberts University, head coach Paul Mills. From University of North Dakota, head coach Paul Sather. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. And first thing I'm going to hit you with is the hot button topic everybody's talking about, the Fair Pay to Play Act. We've seen it introduced as legislation out in California, expecting it to happen in Florida, Colorado, Minnesota, and numerous other states. It's something that a lot of people have talked about. They talk about it in very general terms. I don't know if anybody has an idea of how it's going to be implemented. Coach Mills, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the Fair Pay to Play Act, and how might it impact your program?
Yeah, I think every single coach, I mean, maybe minus one or two, would like for their kids to get more money. You know, a lot of them are from impoverished areas. Basketball is a sport of the poor in America. So I grew up that way. You could have a basketball and 15 kids could go down the street and play. We didn't need gloves or helmets or any of that stuff. And so I think most kids that play basketball, from a large portion, specifically in the South, come from socioeconomic disadvantage. So I think all coaches are, how can we get you more money in order to better help you, your family, and your situation? Now, how that gets done is a different question. So I think every coach is for it. I heard Mark Few say last week that, you know, we don't really get into the homelessness problem that politicians often, you know, may have to deal with. I don't know why they're jumping into this problem, but I'm sure there is a framework that can work in order to better benefit these kids. I haven't put too much thought in it. I'm very much for kids getting money. I just don't know how necessarily that's going to be implemented.
Thanks, Coach Mills. You make a great point. I talked to an individual the other day that said sometimes the fastest way for a politician nowadays to make it into the paper is through the sports section.
Yeah.
So that might have something to do with the thought process. Coach Sather, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to get our guys into a stance and practice right now. Honestly, trying to worry about whether, and I think Coach brought up some great points on. I think any coach would want their student athletes to have the right financial situation that they. You know, anything that can improve that is obviously a good thing for them. But, you know, that's something that I think over time will play itself out. I do think it's something the NCAA has to have its antennas up on. I do think there's some things that could be it's going to be very impactful. There's going to be some things that these are big-time major changes that maybe haven't been going on in the NCAA that are going to be really impactful to Division I programs. And so it's definitely something that we're going to learn more about as time goes on. But honestly, it's not something that's been on the forefront of my mind personally. But it's interesting, you know, when people have been making money off other people's likeness and they haven't been able to make any money off that, there's just something about that. It isn't fair. So it's definitely, there's some things about it that make a lot of sense, but I'm not the guy to figure out how that happens. But I'm sure they'll let us know when it does.
I hope I have the problem. LeBron has been a very big advocate for this, but I hope I have the problem of having a Zion Williamson to say this is kind of the guy who we're trying to look. He deserves it. He's getting a lot of public exposure. If the Summit League is having to deal with this issue, we're going to be in a pretty good situation.
Yeah.
Great points. I think another coach said define fair. Which I thought was really an interesting perspective, and I also thought it'd be interesting to have all of our current high school seniors sit down and write what they think they would be worth wherever they went.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit different than reality.
Yeah.
I appreciate the comments. Let's jump to something that is directly going to impact this season. They moved the three-point line back to the international distance. How does it impact your program? How does it impact the game in general? Start with you,
well, it's going to be interesting just to see some of the defensive changes that might take place and how teams defend. You know, ball screens being one of them. To me, that's something that we're battling a little bit, just trying to figure out if there's anything we want to do defensively that's different than what we've done in the past. You know, I think kids have become such a. We used to do things with like keep track of their makes from mid-range to threes, and it seems like they're always a lot better from three anyhow. And I think kids adjust pretty well. I don't. There's probably going to be some impact with it. How significant we'll see, but boy, kids have got great range anymore. It just seems like that three-point line, they're pretty comfortable behind it, and if you're moving them back, that foot and a half or plus, I think there'll probably be some short-term difference, but I think over the long period of time, these next 4 or 5 years, I think that adjustment will take place, and you'll see very good percentages down the road too.
Yeah, it typically happens. There'll be a lot of diminishing returns. They'll find a distance somewhere where they go, okay, this is it, but who knows? Coach Mills, your thoughts?
Of the 32 conferences, the Summit League is number 1
Yeah.
at shooting the three.
Yeah.
And so it's a great recruiting tool. But by the same token, I wouldn't mind to see those percentages go down. I think we had 5 teams that were ranked 300 or higher at defending the arc. And I didn't know if that was bad defense or just Mike Dom and great offense. And so I don't know how much of an impact. I think it will have some degree of an impact nationally. I honestly don't know how much of an impact it'll have on this league. This is what this league does. It shoots the basketball. And maybe not the same level of athleticism that happens in other leagues, but very skilled, from Rocky Cruiser at 6'10", who has the ability to shoot all the way down to little bitty guards. And so that is the one thing that this league, if it doesn't impact anybody, it will be the Summit League.
Great observation. Yeah, statistically, it's hard to argue with how good the Summit League is in that arena. I'm just to kind of dovetail off of that. Rule changes in general. The G League's experimenting with, if you get fouled on a 3-point shot attempt, you go to the free throw line, you shoot 1 free throw. If you make it, you get 3 points. If you miss, you play on. Same thing with a 2-point. Now, you can comment on that specifically if you want. What other rule changes can you foresee or would you like to see to help make the game better, if possible? I'm going to start with you, Coach Mills.
Yeah, I think that with the way the game has evolved from 2 post players somewhere around the block, you now see a whole lot more 5-out from the NBA, from Europe, and it trickles down to eventually us. That you will see a widening of the lane in a very short time, I really believe, because those post players around there are going to get pushed out further and further. And I think people really want to open up the game. They like the free-flowing aspect of the game. So I do think it's a matter of time before that happens, the widening of the lane. I think that what is happening is you want to see basketball. There's uniformity from the international level all the way down. So I also think it's a matter of time before colleges go 4 quarters. Mm-hmm. You see that internationally. You see it in the NBA, you see it in the women's game, and I just think that sometimes we're behind. I know the women's game this coming year is adopting sideline OBs on being able to advance the basketball during timeouts. I think that'll eventually, because I think what happens at higher levels, whether it be the FIBA or the NBA, eventually come down to us. We're a little bit more stringent and kind of have our toes dug in a little bit more than most from the men's side. But the widening of the lane and the advancement of the basketball, I see those two happening pretty quickly.
Sounds good. It's hard to disagree with that, Coach.
Yeah, those are the things. I mean, basically the 2 biggest things I think that you've seen that change already starting to take place in basketball at different levels and with the women's game, like Coach said. And I think along with that, probably a quicker shot clock. I mean, I think that shot clock is going to change as well. Mm-hmm. With all these changes, I do think it's going to go back into more of the FIBA rules, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it's heading. Yeah. With that sideline OB as well. So I just, cross between what you see in the NBA and what you see in FIBA. And the women's game has been making those changes. We haven't. So I think we're going to have some drastic changes here in the next few years.
It's interesting, as popular as the NCAA men's tournament is, that could be kind of a contributor at times to say, no, we don't want to change anything because it's great the way it is. But you kind of have to be willing to move, and advancing the ball on timeouts. I said this earlier, that the defensive curmudgeon in me says, no, they make him work 94 feet. But I think from an entertainment value, and
it changes it.
And then having a list of how many sideline out of bounds where you had maybe one or two before, very interesting perspective. I appreciate those thoughts. I think it's the game is going to continue to change, and if they can find ways to make it better, it makes perfect sense. Social media, has it changed the way you recruit, Coach Sather?
Oh yeah, absolutely, it's changed. There's so much more information out there, and there's so much more information to put out there. I think sometimes you got to be careful of how much. But there's no question it's changed. Kids are able to put their whole profile out there and video link. I mean, it's such a small world anymore, and so it has, and it's continuing to change it. So it's becoming a lot easier to, and there's a good way to kind of evaluate young people too, and just how they run their social media accounts. It used to be. I always tell people. You watch how these young people interact with their parents, their friends, their teammates, how they handle criticism, and now you can look at a social media account and see a lot of those things in that. And there's a lot of red flags with some of that. And so it's had a huge impact in recruiting, and some of it's really been helpful from just maybe that's someone we want to stay away from. So it can go both ways. There's no question.
Yeah, I agree with Paul that I tell people this. It takes about 2 minutes to figure out if somebody's good enough or not to be on your basketball team. This isn't rocket scientists.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't rocket scientists. And now to figure out whether or not you're a good kid, whether you can handle things that are really difficult, the first thing I do when I see a kid that may be a potential student athlete is I go straight to his Instagram or Twitter. And I just scroll through the past year because you want to see what they're about. And usually, as teenagers, they're willing to put their thoughts out there. And we've not recruited guys on account of what they do based on their social media. And then we've further investigated guys. But I actually think it makes us more savvy in regards to who we recruit. And I think it's beneficial. But we're not curing cancer here. We aren't the smartest people in the room. And to identify if a kid can play relative to your players isn't that difficult. To figure out who he is and what they're about, this actually helps us. And now when they get on your team, then that's when you really have to start. Let's set some parameters here about, because you're not just representing, as I share with our guys, you don't play at ORU, you play for ORU. There's a long heritage. There is a number of people that you now represent, and you need to be mindful of it, whereas they may not have ever been before.
Yeah, I really like your perspective on that, gentlemen. I think it makes perfect sense. It used to be that programs would go out and critically evaluate kids before they decided if they wanted to recruit them. And now Kansas basketball has kind of changed it, where kids are looking at the program and saying, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're...
Yeah.
Very interesting
Yeah.
perspective from that standpoint. But gentlemen, love your commentary, love your feedback, love your thoughts on things. I wish you nothing but the best this upcoming season.